Imagine looking at a blueprint, like a standard architect's blueprint.
Okay, yeah.
At first glance, you just see, abstract lines, some geometric shapes, a bunch of calculations.
Right, it's just paper.
Exactly. It exists entirely on paper, it's theoretical, and it looks completely harmless.
Mm-hmm.
But then construction actually begins.
Mm-hmm.
Materials are gathered, workers get deployed, and those abstract lines, well, they're built into a slaughterhouse.
That's a really chilling way to put it, but yeah.
And that tension, right, that
Yeah.
tension between abstract theory and physical atrocity is exactly what we are dissecting in today's deep dive.
It really is.
We're looking at a man who literally drafted the intellectual blueprints for one of the most brutal regimes in human history, Alfred Rosenberg.
It's just such a profound historical paradox when you look at him.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, we are examining a figure whose pseudo-philosophical theories basically provided the core scaffolding for the Third Reich.
Right.
Yet at the exact same time, this guy was privately mocked by his own leader.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. Hitler thought he was weak, that he entirely lacked charisma, and said he was a writer of just incomprehensible nonsense.
Yeah, his own boss is just roasting him behind closed doors.
Exactly. And to piece this whole thing together for you, we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today.
So what are we looking at?
We've got the Nuremberg trial transcripts, some extensive historical analyses of his ideological texts, and this is the crazy part, the deeply unsettling recovery of his long-lost personal diary from 2013.
Yeah. That diary discovery is going to blow people's minds later on. But let's start at the beginning, because you might assume the chief intellectual architect of extreme German nationalism was, well, actually German.
Right, you'd think so.
But he wasn't. Rosenberg was born in 1893 in Reval, which we now know as Tallinn, Estonia.
Right, Estonia.
So at the time, that was actually part of the Russian Empire.
Exactly. He was a Baltic German.
Growing up totally outside the borders of the very state he would later become, insanely obsessed with.
It's a classic case of the radical outsider.
And he didn't even start out in politics, right? He actually studied architecture.
He did, first in Riga, and then he moved to Moscow. And he actually received his PhD in 1917.
Okay, so that architectural training feels crucial to understanding his mindset later on.
Oh, absolutely. He was literally trained to design structures, to impose rigid order on physical space.
Right.
But the environment he was living in was completely collapsing around him.
Because we're talking about 1917 in Moscow.
Exactly. The catalyst that truly crystallized his entire twisted worldview was the Russian Revolution.
Right, because the Bolsheviks seized power in 1917.
And Rosenberg, being this wealthy, bourgeois Baltic German, he faced an immediate existential threat.
He's exactly the kind of person they're coming after.
Right. So he flees the encroaching revolution, and he ultimately arrives in Munich, Germany in late 1918.
And when he arrives in Munich, he is carrying this incredibly toxic ideological baggage.
Oh,
The sources show he brought with him this virulent hatred of communism. But it was already deeply entwined with a very visceral anti-Semitism.
right. He was already combining them.
Yeah. He had actually been delivering speeches blaming Jewish people for Marxism before he even crossed the border into Germany.
Because he didn't view the Russian Revolution as a political event, or even an economic one.
How did he see it?
He viewed it through a purely biological and conspiratorial lens.
Wow, okay.
He had already absorbed all these early proto-fascist theories, and the trauma of fleeing the revolution basically fused those ideas in his mind into this singular paranoid narrative.
So to understand his role in the early Nazi movement, I like to think of him less as a charismatic politician and more like a software developer.
Very good analogy.
Right, like someone writing a malicious underlying code for a startup.
Yeah.
He joins the German Workers' Party, which is the precursor to the Nazi Party, in early 1919.
Way early.
That is months before Adolf Hitler even attends his first meeting.
Right, Hitler wasn't even in the picture yet.
Rosenberg is on the ground floor. He is literally programming the ideological operating system that others would eventually use with, frankly, terrifying effectiveness.
And because he was there so early, he really positioned himself as the movement's chief theorist.
Right.
He started writing for their early publications, and he was systematizing his obsession with this fabricated global conspiracy.
Linking Judaism and communism.
Exactly. He basically provided this burgeoning thuggish movement with a pseudo-intellectual vocabulary.
Okay, but I'm struggling to reconcile this with what happens a few years later. In 1923,
The putsch.
yeah, the infamous beer hall putsch takes place. Hitler tries to violently seize power in Munich. It fails completely, and he gets thrown in prison.
Right.
But right before he goes to jail, Hitler appoints Rosenberg as the temporary leader of the entire Nazi movement.
Yeah.
This makes no sense to me. If Rosenberg was just the theoretical architect, the guy quietly writing the malicious code behind the scenes, why thrust him into the CEO role?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. By all accounts, he was an awkward, totally uninspiring public speaker. Why on earth put a charisma vacuum in charge of a populist movement?
Well, if we look at the psychology of totalitarian leadership, it actually makes perfect cynical sense.
Oh, really? How so?
Hitler chose Rosenberg precisely because of those flaws.
Wait, because he was bad at it.
Exactly. Hitler was terrified of a rival taking over his movement while he was locked away in a cell.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If he had appointed a really dynamic, popular leader, someone who could work a crowd, that person might have consolidated power.
And just refused to step down when Hitler got out.
Exactly. Rosenberg was a totally safe bet. He was an ideologue, not a demagogue. I mean, he couldn't captivate a crowd if he tried.
So he was deliberately chosen to fail.
Basically, yeah.
The goal was just to keep the seat warm without stealing the spotlight.
And predictably, he was completely marginalized by the more ruthless, power-hungry members of the party.
Right.
The movement splintered almost immediately under his watch. He proved entirely ineffective at holding any of the factions together.
So, ousted from direct political control, he pivots.
Right.
He realizes, okay, my strength isn't in rallying the masses in a beer hall.
Definitely not.
His strength is shaping the intellectual and spiritual core of the movement, which leads us right into the 1930s.
Where he really gets to work.
Yeah, where he begins drafting this massive, comprehensive blueprint of hatred.
Right. This is the era of his giant 1930 publication, this massive book that essentially attempted to rewrite all of world history through a purely racial lens.
And the core mechanism of his argument was the construction of this incredibly rigid human hierarchy.
Exactly. He placed what he termed the Nordic people at the absolute peak of civilization.
Right.
Attributing basically every major cultural and historical achievement across millennia entirely to them.
And conversely, he placed Jewish and black people at the very bottom of this fabricated ladder, just completely stripping them of their humanity.
But the sources indicate he didn't even stop at pseudo-biology.
No, he goes further.
He extended this whole framework into theology.
Which requires a massive intellectual contortion on his part.
Oh, a huge one. Because he despised traditional Christianity.
Right, the Catholic and Protestant teachings that focus on things like humility or mercy, original sin.
To him, those were weak concepts, things holding the German people back from their destiny.
So his solution is wild. He pushes for something he branded positive Christianity.
Yeah, the mechanics of this positive Christianity are just a masterclass in ideological manipulation.
It's crazy.
Because, think about it, how do you maintain a Christian identity for the masses while simultaneously embracing virulent anti-Semitism?
Right, because Jesus was Jewish.
Exactly.
Right.
So Rosenberg's solution was to just completely rewrite the theology, to strip Christianity of its Jewish roots entirely.
He just edits it out.
He argued that the Old Testament should be discarded completely, thrown away.
Unbelievable.
And furthermore, he attempted to rebrand Jesus, not as a Jewish man from the Levant, but as an Aryan warrior who was actively resisting Judaism.
He is literally trying to reverse engineer a 2,000-year-old religion just to fit a political narrative.
It's astounding arrogance.
It is. But this actually brings up this staggering paradox from the historical records.
What's that?
His 1930 book supposedly sold over 1 million copies by the end of the regime.
Huge bestseller.
Right. Yet, almost no one actually read it.
Yeah, that's the irony.
It was notoriously dense, horribly repetitive, and just borderline unreadable. I mean, even Hitler allegedly found it totally baffling.
Hitler called it pseudo-religious nonsense.
Exactly. So how does a man whose own leader won't even read his magnum opus remain so incredibly influential in the government?
Well, this really highlights how ideology actually functions in a totalitarian system.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Rosenberg's value wasn't in his prose style. It wasn't in his mainstream popularity. His value was entirely in his utility. Hitler didn't actually need to read the book to weaponize the concepts inside it.
Oh, I see.
Rosenberg essentially provided the regime's darkest, most violent impulses with a veneer of historical destiny. He gave it philosophical weight.
He systematized the hatred.
Exactly. He gave them an academic-sounding justification for all the brutality they wanted to commit anyway.
Specifically, He successfully bridged a really massive contradiction in the party's propaganda, right?
He did. He fully merged anti-Semitic hatred with anti-communist paranoia.
Creating that unified concept of Judeo-Bolshevism.
Yes. And that was a brilliant, albeit totally dark, ideological maneuver on his part.
Because before, they were two separate targets.
Right. You had international capitalism on one side and international communism on the other.
And he comes in and argues, no, they're actually just two arms of the exact same Jewish conspiracy.
He made the enemy singular, unified, and totally existential.
And the regime clearly rewarded him for providing that framework. Because by 1934, Hitler appointed him as the head of a special cultural surveillance office.
Right.
So now, he isn't just writing dense books alone in his study. He is officially tasked with overseeing the ideological education of the entire Nazi Party.
He is institutionalizing his theories deep into the actual state apparatus at this point.
And the operations of that office really show how abstract theories become enforced reality.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
He wasn't just debating philosophy anymore. His bureaucracy was literally dictating what constituted acceptable art.
Right.
They were rewriting history textbooks for schools. They were auditing the political reliability of teachers and local party officials.
He essentially created the curriculum of intolerance that educated a whole generation of administrators.
Which brings us to the most horrifying phase of this history.
Yeah. As World War II erupts, Rosenberg's theoretical blueprints for conquest are suddenly violently put into practice.
And the transition from abstract ideas to physical atrocity really begins with cultural plunder.
Right. Because early in the war, he was instrumental in creating a special task force, one often referred to by his own name, actually.
The Rosenberg Task Force?
Yeah. And they were responsible for the massive, systematic looting of cultural goods all across occupied Europe.
And the scale of this operation was just staggering.
Unimaginable.
When German forces occupied a city, say, like Paris,
Right, yeah.
Rosenberg's task force immediately went to work. They specifically targeted prominent Jewish families, private galleries, ancient archives.
And they didn't just steal priceless art, right?
No, it was everything. They stole musical instruments, personal libraries, family records.
The mechanism here feels really important to highlight, because this wasn't just troops doing mere wartime pillaging.
Not at all. It was a highly bureaucratic, meticulously cataloged effort to erase an entire culture's physical presence.
And literally transfer its heritage to the conquerors.
The theoretical erasure he wrote about in 1930 literally became physical erasure in 1940.
And his role expanded drastically the very next year.
1941.
Right. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, he was appointed head of the Reich Ministry for the occupied Eastern Territories.
A massive promotion.
He was now technically the chief civilian administrator for this vast, conquered landscape that encompassed millions of people.
And he viewed the East exactly like a geopolitical chessboard. He had a very specific, very grand design for it.
What was the plan?
He didn't just want to march in and hold the territory militarily. He wanted to physically carve the Soviet Union into specific administrative blocks.
Like drawing new borders.
Exactly. Creating new entities in the Baltics and setting up a totally separate Ukrainian administration.
And the goal there was to manufacture a series of buffer states against Russia proper.
Right. He wanted to weaponize local sentiments to his advantage.
Because he realized that a lot of people in the Baltics and Ukraine deeply despised Soviet rule.
They had suffered horribly under Stalin.
Exactly. So he saw this opportunity to exploit that anti-Soviet nationalism for Germany's long-term benefit.
But here's where we find a really jarring point of friction in the historical sources.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
As the civilian minister, Rosenberg repeatedly clashed with the SS and the military over how these occupied non-Russian populations were being treated.
He actually filed formal complaints about the extreme, unrestrained brutality being inflicted on the locals by the SS.
Oh, right. And out of context, if you just read that memo, it looks like a rare moment of moral hesitation from a high-ranking Nazi.
Like maybe he suddenly had a conscience.
But we have to firmly strip away any illusion of morality here.
Oh, completely.
This was entirely pragmatic. Rosenberg was furious because the sheer, unrestrained cruelty of the SS was ruining his long-term chessboard strategy.
Right. Because when the SS treated the Ukrainians or the Baltic peoples with horrific violence, it alienated the local populations.
It drove them directly into the arms of the Soviet partisan resistance groups.
So it was just a tactical disagreement. It was an argument over how best to subjugate a continent.
Exactly. Rosenberg was trying to run a sophisticated propaganda effort. I mean, he even attempted to implement agrarian laws.
Offering to restore family farms to locals if they collaborated with the German administration.
But his efforts were constantly undermined by his rivals within the regime, particularly Hermann Goering and the SS leadership.
Because they just did not care about his theories.
Goering and the SS viewed the occupied peoples merely as expendable slave labor. Period.
And they viewed the land just as a resource to be brutally stripped bare to feed the war machine.
They considered Rosenberg's ideas about fostering local collaboration to be weak. They thought it was overly intellectual nonsense.
So you have this terrifying dynamic where the chief ideologue is essentially complaining that the executioners are being too messy.
Yes.
And that they're jeopardizing his beautiful long-term architectural plan.
And to remove any lingering ambiguity about him, despite these tactical disputes regarding certain Slavic populations, Rosenberg was comprehensively complicit in the Holocaust. In a press conference in late 1941, he explicitly publicly stated that the Jewish question could only be solved by the total biological eradication of all Jewish people in Europe.
He was the intellectual author of the genocide.
And his civilian ministry actively facilitated its logistics in the East.
Which inevitably brings us to the collapse of the Third Reich.
The end of the line.
By May 1945, the regime is destroyed. Rosenberg goes into hiding, but he is quickly captured by Allied troops in northern Germany.
And this initiates the final chapter, the Nuremberg trials,
where the architects of the regime are finally forced to face the reality of what they built.
And at Nuremberg, he was indicted on all 4 major counts.
Conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity.
And the judgment against him was absolute.
Yeah.
The tribunal held him directly responsible for both the systematic cultural plunder of Europe and the lethal conditions imposed on the Eastern territories.
But beyond just the legal proceedings, the psychological profile compiled by the prison psychiatrists who evaluated him is deeply unsettling.
It's fascinating.
Because they studied Rosenberg extensively. And they found a man entirely trapped within the architecture of his own rigid theories.
Unwilling to bend at all.
Right. The prosecution presented mountains of evidence. Graphic film footage of the concentration camps. Meticulous documentation of mass murder.
And how did he react?
He remained completely unfazed.
Wow.
He flat out refused to amend his theories or acknowledge that his ideology was the direct cause of the carnage they were showing him on the screen.
He was just an inflexible fanatic to the very last moment.
Following his conviction, he was sentenced to death. And on the morning of October 16th, 1946, he was executed by hanging.
And according to the journalists who witnessed the executions, the condemned men were asked at the gallows if they had any final words.
Right.
Rosenberg was the only one who refused to make a statement.
He just simply replied with one flat, emotionless word, no.
No.
It's such a chilling end to a life dedicated entirely to destruction.
It really is.
But the story of Alfred Rosenberg actually has a coda, a relatively recent historical discovery that kind of forces us to reevaluate how we think about the architects of atrocity.
Yes. This discovery dramatically shifted our understanding of his day-to-day mindset.
Because in 2013, following this extensive investigation by U.S. authorities, over 400 pages of Rosenberg's lost personal diary were finally recovered.
The diary had been missing since the Nuremberg trials.
Right. Spirited away by a prosecutor and hidden for decades.
And when you hear that the private diary of one of history's greatest monsters has been found, you naturally expect to find, like, a supervillain's manifesto.
Exactly. You expect pages dripping with malice or these dramatic confessions of evil or profound, dark philosophical musings.
But the reality revealed in those pages is arguably much more disturbing.
What was actually in it?
The diary was not a manifesto at all. It was basically a ledger.
A ledger?
Yeah, it was filled with mundane, unvarnished bureaucratic tracking.
Yeah.
He spent pages detailing petty office rivalries with other Nazi officials, complaining about his own status within the party, and just documenting the cold administrative logistics of forced labor.
It was literally just the paperwork of atrocity.
Exactly. The entries just bizarrely juxtapose mundane administrative grievances right next to the orchestration of mass death.
Treating both with the exact same flat, bureaucratic tone.
And that is a provocative thought we want to leave you with today.
We all want to believe that the architects of historic evils are monsters operating in a constant state of cartoonish malice.
Right, that they're visibly evil all the time.
But when you look at the life of Alfred Rosenberg, you see something entirely else.
Something much quieter.
How much easier is it for a society to mobilize for unthinkable crimes when the architect of those crimes hides them behind the mundane language of administration, abstract philosophy, and pseudo-intellectual theory?
It's a terrifying question.
Because when the blueprint looks like nothing more than clean mathematical lines, it is terrifyingly easy to forget that you are actually building a machine for destruction.